All right, guys, I just wanted to record a fairly short video going through this PowerPoint for you guys, uh, touching on really the parts that I think are kind of the most important to realize about professional emails and about emailing. A lot of this is going to be common sense stuff that I would venture to say almost all of you already know. I would be shocked if somebody in this class hadn't sent an email in a professional environment at some point. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this, but I am going to hit some points that I think are fairly major, fairly important, some of the things that I think are significant when it comes to professional emails. So really, like the book says professional emails are the way that we communicate. They're the largest form of communication that we use on a day-to-day basis in business, outside of actually talking face to face with people. So that's why I think it's so important to know how to craft these emails, how to construct these emails in a professional manner, so that you don't end up looking unprofessional, or maybe, in worst case scenario, you look like you don't know what you're talking about. So, these learning outcomes here, these are all things that you should be able to do by the time we get through this particular section of the class. These are, I would imagine, things you already mostly know how to do. You may not be able to, spout off the 6 C's of communication, but, that's coming up here pretty soon, so you'll be able to do that. They're all common sense things. They're all things that when you're writing and communicating in business, you're already thinking about, and if you're not, you should be. So just take note of them, and when you're writing and communicating in a professional environment, realize you've got to use each of them. So emails are what we're going to discuss in this section, obviously. Later in the semester, we're going to talk about letters. Next week, we're going to discuss memos. The big difference between a memo and an email is that memos are a little more formal. Sometimes they'll convey some more important information, and they're typically for wide distribution. So usually they're sent out to almost everybody in the company or almost everybody in a department, whereas an email, you're typically sending it to 1, 2, sometimes 3 people. Sometimes you'll send it to a group of people. But emails are usually brief, they're informal, and you're usually only talking about one topic. You really shouldn't be sending any kind of confidential information by email. I know when I worked at Mercy, we used what we called e-numbers, which were unique identifiers that only Mercy used to identify patients. That way we weren't sending information about like the patient's name or the patient's date of birth or social security number. We weren't sending those through email. Those were all contained in the electronic health record system, but we did communicate with each other when we needed to talk about a specific patient. Or let's see, like me, I was writing revenue reports, so we needed to know information of revenue derived from a certain patient. We would use those e-numbers as a unique identifier. We never, ever, ever, ever sent things like social security numbers or date of birth or anything that could really identify a person to somebody externally if they got a hold of the email. So here are the 6 C's of communication. You want to be clear, you want to be complete, concise, consistent, correct, and courteous. Okay, so you want to make sure you're using specific information, you're using direct wording and transitions. For completeness, you just want to make sure you're including all the details that somebody would need if they needed to make a decision, or if you were trying to give, think of it like if you were trying to give somebody directions to a place they didn't know how to get to, you would want to include all the information possible so that they got there without issue. Conciseness, that's what I'm going to be working on in this video, is trying to get it down to a reasonable amount of time that you guys will watch. So get to the point quickly, and don't be abrupt, curt, or rude, which is hard to do in an email. It's hard to convey tone, but we'll talk about that. Consistent. So you want to use the same treatment for similar terms and the same formatting. So if you're going to say 6 p.m. and then 4 p.m., don't use capitals for the P and the M in one and then lowercase for the P and the M in the other one, or use periods between the P and the M in one and not the other. You want to be consistent in tone, consistent in treatment and mechanics throughout your communication. You want to be correct, obviously. You want to verify your information for accuracy. You want to check for grammatical errors. That's the big one. There are ways to do that, and we'll talk about that at the end. And you want to be courteous, and that really means kind of right from the viewpoint of the reader, which can sometimes be difficult to do, especially if it's somebody you're unfamiliar with. But just kind of stop when you're writing and think about, how do I think the reader is going to interpret this? What is their mindset when they're reading this? So just one note here. I mean, this is all information that you guys are already familiar with, but it's written communication. It's just like a memo. It's just like a letter. It can be used internally, externally, except you can do this 24/7. What the book is referring to is 24/7, right? So you could send one of these in the middle of the night and have it received, read, and replied to in the middle of the night. If you write a handwritten letter, that's a little more difficult to respond to instantaneously. Memos are sometimes, if they are distributed in a hard copy, hard to reply to or hard to react to on the fly. One other note here, you generally want to omit courtesy titles in an email. So things like Mr., Mrs., Miss, those kind of things, you usually don't put those in an email. It's a little too formal for us. However, one thing I will caution you on is if you are dealing with a PhD, they typically do like to have their title used. So doctor, when you're communicating with a PhD. There are several purposes for writing an email. You can be requesting information, you can be giving information, you can be reporting something out to a group of people. The one that I've sent the most often, especially in auditing, is to remind people to, hey, you said 2 weeks ago that you were going to send this to me in the next couple of days and I don't have it. So you'll be sending lots of reminder emails. That is going to be the majority of what you would send, I would guess. And also you're going to be transmitting information, things, like attachments and stuff like that. You may be transmitting documentation, things, stuff like that. And also to promote goodwill. You'll get the occasional attaboy or good job email from your boss. If everybody's hitting deadlines and everybody's doing good work, you'll get the old pat on the back email version from your boss occasionally. So the parts of the email, so when you're formatting an email, you have to have a from line, and typically that's going to be automatically included. You're not going to have to put that when you start typing out an email. Obviously, if you're on an email server, the email program knows that it's from you, right? I can't think of a time when you're going to have to put the from in manually. Dateline, again, that's also going to be included automatically in email messages. You'll see a recurring theme here that most of this is pretty automatic. Some emails will date it down to the second that you send the email. They'll put that timestamp on there. Those are useful, especially in fields of accounting like auditing, where you want to know exactly when something was done. Subject lines, these are probably the most difficult part of the email for me, I know, because I like to just get it out there quick and say question. That's not very descriptive. It's not a very good subject line. So you want to be a little more specific. So like, question about class today. Question about class on 1/25/2022, something like that, so that they know what the email is about automatically, but it's not so long that it's like reading a novel. It's also okay to include things like urgent or a request or FYI when you are sending those emails, especially if you need something back immediately, or if you want them to know that, hey, this is just an informational email. I'm letting you know this information. Typically, email servers and software are going to have a button that you can hit that flags it as high importance or urgent, and it will change the way that email is presented to the recipient once they get it. The greeting in the email, you're going to use a first name unless you're addressing your employer, an instructor, or other elder. I will say in this class, I'm not too big on being called Mr. or Professor or Instructor or anything like that. I don't care. Really, you can call me Kyle. However, there are other instructors that may want you to call them Doctor or Mr. or Professor or Mrs. or whatever the case may be. So just be careful when you're sending it, at least the first time you send an email, address them formally. The message or the body. So you're going to want to double space between the heading, the body, and the paragraphs. Most employers are going to have a house style for emails. It's going to be pretty bland, pretty boring, basically just a blank white page. They may say that they may give you something that you have to include in your signature or something like that. But mostly it's going to be a pretty boring design. Software like Microsoft Outlook will offer you the option to include backgrounds and designs on your email format. Don't do it. First of all, it eats up tons of server space, and so your employer is probably not going to be thrilled about that. Secondly, I know myself when I get emails from people and they've got, their background is a bunch of dolphins and butterflies or whatever, it doesn't look very professional. You just want to keep it plain white email. And then you got your closing. So complimentary closing is such like we usually use sincerely and stuff like that in a letter. You don't really need that in an email. Just your signature at the bottom is fine. I think I include thank you just out of habit, but you definitely don't have to in email. Again, this is a much more formal form of informal form of communication. Reference lines are just just that. They're telling you, hey, we've got an attachment or something in this email, and usually those are at the header of the email. And then finally, you'll have your signature. Most email programs have an auto signature feature that appears at the end of all your emails. Microsoft Outlook, you can go to options under your file menu and you can set a signature for reply or for new replies, old replies, out of office, new emails, forwarding, all kinds of stuff. You can set your signature. Typically, it's going to be your name with any credentials that you have, your office phone number, your business phone, your home phone or cell if you're comfortable with that. And some people will include their email address at the bottom. I've never found that to be super helpful, but some people do that for whatever reason. You can also include a fax number if you're still using fax machines, or any other kind of information. Now it's popular to put like Facebook links and Twitter links and LinkedIn links and all that stuff as well at the bottom of your email and your signature. So you want to limit the length, topics, and recipients. So you really want to make sure that your email is just one topic and pretty brief. And you really only want to send it to people who need information. You don't want to be spamming people constantly with emails, including people, CCing people on the email that don't really need to be on the email chain is really annoying. I've been part of that many hundreds of times, and it's just like, just take me off of this email chain, please. You want to watch your tone when you're writing an email, and this is difficult to do. You want to avoid sarcasm, because it's easy to misinterpret things. I know I have emailed my wife before even, and she has gotten upset with me because she thought I meant one thing or another. What you don't want is somebody coming up to your desk all upset and angry in a huff and mad at you, and you going, whoa, that's not at all what we meant there. I was trying to say something completely different. I think you misinterpreted it. So that you're also going to want to avoid things like all caps, because people interpret that as yelling or somebody being angry in an email. All lowercase, because it just looks, honestly, let's be honest, it looks kind of silly. Or you want to avoid very small font type, just because they can get difficult to read, right? For the most part, don't use emoticons when you're sending an email. If somebody uses, I would not use a smiley face in an email to my boss. But if my boss used one with me, I might sometime in the future think, okay, well, Dr. Church is fine with seeing a smiley face in an email occasionally, and send one to her if I've got good news or something. But typically you don't want to use emoticons. You always want to proofread. And this is not just emails. This is anything we do in this class, any kind of communication, any kind of writing you do, you always want to proofread the email before you send it. Especially if it's what we consider to be like a bad news email, or, you're upset about something and you're having to vent to this person, or you're having to, like I said, deliver some bad news. You definitely want to proofread it. And I would recommend having somebody that's kind of a neutral third party proofread that email as well, to make sure that You're not sending something out of anger or frustration that is going to be misinterpreted or going to get you in trouble at some point in the future. We already addressed not sending confidential information. It's just not a good idea. There's just so many things that can go wrong with email and technology. You send it to the wrong email address, or the servers get hacked, or something like that, and they're pulling sensitive information off. You just don't do it. It's just good policy not to send confidential information. And speaking of policy, you just want to follow your company's email policy. If they tell you, hey, we don't want you emailing your girlfriend on business hours or your boyfriend or whatever, don't do it. Just follow whatever the company's policy is. Believe me, they're going to let you know when you get in training and onboarding. They're going to go over ad nauseum all of their policies. So you will be aware of it by the time you are sending emails. Like we mentioned earlier, avoid spamming or sending other unsolicited email to others. When you're replying to emails, respond to urgent emails upon reading them, and respond to those requiring answers by the end of the day. I typically go with the 24-hour rule, but even if it's a really urgent email, I'll let them know that I've seen it. Hey, okay, I've seen this. I'm looking into it. I'll let you know as soon as I can. Something to that effect. And then try within that 24-hour period to get back to them with some kind of answer. This next point, type the answer above the original message. That's not going to be too big of a deal, really, because most email software that you're going to use professionally is going to set you up to do that as soon as you start replying anyways. Don't reply all if you only need to send it to one person. I've gotten in some horrible reply all chains when I worked at Mercy. There's 40,000 employees there, and somebody sends an email accidentally to all of Mercy, because there is an email group that goes out to all of Mercy employees. And all of a sudden now you've got 500 people replying to that email chain saying stop replying all. And it's just horrible, horrible, horrible. So be conscious of that. Always check before you send a really large attachment, because some people's email services may not be able to handle attachments of that size, and it causes confusion. And you also want to be wary of viruses. You got to keep your virus protection programs up to date, but that's going to be on your employer. But also you want to make sure that you're not being phished. And if you don't know what phishing is, it is essentially a very sophisticated looking email. It looks like it comes from Netflix, for instance, and they say, hey, we see that you signed in a different location. Can you provide us your password to let us know that it's you? That's a phishing scam. That's how viruses get downloaded onto servers. So never, ever, if you see an email that you think is suspicious, I would send it to your IT department, forward it to your IT department. They're going to know what to do with it from there. So tone really depends on the position of and your relation to the recipient. So the way I would send an email to a student is different than the tone I would use in an email that I would send to my boss, which is different than the tone that I would use in an email to send to Anna and Lane, and that's different than one I would send to my wife. It really depends on who you're talking to. You are going to know what the tone should be. Usually you're going to want to use a personal, pleasant, and somewhat informal tone. More formal when addressing top management and more informal for a peer subordinate. Like I said, you're going to know that. If you're not sure, you can choose a balanced tone. Not too casual, not too formal. Definitely still not using emoticons or anything like that. Avoid contractions, but also don't use stilted language. So what that means is, Sean... We kind of had this back and forth a little bit on Packback about stilted language, and that's what we were talking about. Using fancy sounding language. Sometimes it comes off as pretentious. You really just don't want to do it. Subject matter also determines the tone for the memo or email. If it's a serious topic, obviously it should be a serious tone. If you're going to have to give somebody some really bad news, you don't want to be making jokes at the top of the email. As far as special formatting, mechanical techniques, you're going to want to enumerate lists of important items. That means put a number in front of it, right? Number 1, number 2, number 3. Use bullets to emphasize points when the sequence is important. You can use bold, underline, italics, capitals, or centering to emphasize the importance of details. Columns with heading make it easier to read and understand sometimes. You can underline or bold and use side headings to show natural breaks in a message. So if you've got for whatever reason you're having to send a fairly lengthy email and it's got 2 or 3 subjects in it, you can break those subjects up and use a bold header so that people know, okay, we're entering a new subject, we're using a new subject. You can use color coding to attract attention. If you need to say, okay, this thing that is going to, if you do this thing, it's going to be bad, put it in red. If you do this thing, it's going to be good, put it in green, or whatever the case may be. You don't want to overuse these because it does reduce their effectiveness and it can make the email look unprofessional. So we'll just talk about these really quick. These are just some examples of what not to do in an email. So you can see here the subject was stuff. Obviously, we've got tons of misspelling. Thanks for being so fast responding to me. Tons of grammar errors right there in that one. I've been super sick all week and haven't been feeling up to doing homework. Are you sure I can't turn them into you? It really sucks not being able to. This is not a great email to send an instructor. Not a good email. Tons of grammar issues. Far too casual, and it honestly, it sounds a little demanding. Here's another example. Hey Kyle, where is your office? If I get this, I'm going to send you an email back saying, have you looked in your syllabus? Because this is something that you can easily answer for yourself just by looking for a minute or two. Also, I wasn't in class because I am sick. Sorry for sending this after class, but I am sick. Can you send me the notes for today or meet me in your office at 12? So this is a student trying to set up a meeting. Like I said in the syllabus discussion, please use appointment. Don't just send me an email saying I'm going to be there at 12 because honestly, I'm probably going to forget unless it's on my calendar. I got tons of stuff going on most days, so just sending me an email and not setting an actual appointment is no bueno. So like we said, don't ask for information that can be located easily on the syllabus or on your company's website. Everybody's guilty of this every once in a while, but just try to mitigate it. Try to limit how often you do it. Don't hit send before checking that the recipient is correct. If anybody wants to hear an embarrassing story, please let me know. Maybe if people hop on to the meet and greet thing that we're doing here in a couple weeks on Blackboard, I'll tell the story. It's incredibly embarrassing, and it was just through my own stupidity and lack of professionalism that it happened. Don't hit reply. Don't hit reply all if there's 1,000 people on the email chain. I've done it before. It's embarrassing. Again, I can tell stories. I've seen people at the state auditor's office that lost their jobs over things like this. Again, that's another story I can tell if you guys are interested in hearing it. Don't use your personal email for business purposes. Mostly that's a CYA, a cover your butt type thing. It's a liability thing. Keep in mind, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy when you're using work equipment. So when you're emailing, when you're using an email server that is your work's email server, when you're using a computer that is your work computer, you got no expectation of privacy. They can go in and pull all those emails if they want. They can look at anything they want that you've done on that computer. So just be cautious of what you're doing with email on their equipment. I've seen people lose their jobs over this exact same thing. So just a reminder that university emails are public access. So careful what you're sending out, but it's also the reason that when I communicate with you guys, I want to use university email. So just the last thing here, Grammarly. Grammarly is a free online grammar checker that you can use for anything that you want to. You can use it for emails. You can use it for Blackboard posts. You can use it for any papers that you're writing. You can use it for any poetry that you're wanting to write. You can use it to check the grammar on your teacher evaluations at the end of the semester. If you're planning that far ahead and you got some stuff to get off your chest anonymously, you can use it for that. You can really use it for anything that your heart desires. That you've written. It's a better spell checker or editor than what you get with like Microsoft Word, and it's a free piece of online software. So no reason not to use it if you're wanting to try and make sure that your grammar is good. So thanks guys, I appreciate it, and I will talk to you guys later.